Okay, spiritual realities are physically expressed. It wasn't just, I decided I'm married, that's it, and so forth. There was things that expressed that. And again, communally. You didn't get married in isolation. You didn't live in isolation. And I think we know this, even though in America we had, try to romantically hold on to the fiction of what I call the rugged individual, the isolated individual. We are all the product of the relationships, both horizontal and vertical throughout time and space in our lives. Okay? They expressed things. Agrarian society. How marriage meant life, or not only for the family, but for the larger community. They were an agrarian society. When you got married, right away, there was a partnership, and you were going to be, plowing the fields, doing this, doing that, herding sheep, whatever it took, and both of you would be involved. Except the poor woman would also wind up getting pregnant and having kids on top of all that. And there's a lot of thought that the reason that the law came about a woman like being in hiding for 40 days after her birth process had happened was not only because they didn't have the hygienic means, because you couldn't circulate in society back then. I mean, the hygienic means women have to deal with any bleeding is only like 100 and some years old. Okay, so you literally were, hidden away because you couldn't circulate. But I think the other reason is to keep any idiot husband that thought my wife can give birth and tomorrow plow about 15 acres of field, and then she hemorrhages to death. So it's actually in a way partly to protect the woman, though now those things don't play in as much by comparison. But anyway, the whole thing of marriage was also to contribute to the larger community around it. Okay? Upon engagement, okay, there's a whole process. And I'm not against romantic love or romantic feelings. I have a sentimental side to me. I even can cry at certain movies and everything else, and so on and so forth. But that was a byproduct. That wasn't the main reason you got married. You were looking for a life partner, because it was a matter of life and death if you didn't choose the right partner. Okay? Upon engagement, a man spent, this is even through the time of Jesus, a man spent the year preparing the home to bring his bride to. There was no sexual anything going on in that time. His job was to prepare the home. His job was to be able to have everything ready so he could take care and play his role within the family. Okay? If he wasn't ready to play his role in the family, he shouldn't have thought about getting married. They wouldn't have let him think about getting married. Same thing with the woman. The woman spent time also, usually preparing her dowry. Okay? And we can go into what that means when Jesus talks about one of the problems of remarrying the woman you divorced, type of thing. There's a whole thing in Judaism they struggle with. Sexual intimacy began after the celebration, where they come to live together as a life for a lifetime, as a lifestyle for a lifetime. See, sexual intimacy has to do with a lifestyle. It's not just an experience. Like they saw it as part of a whole lifestyle. And to play with it outside of that was like saying you are watering down the lifestyle, what the lifestyle means. It would be tantamount to me picking up the communion cup and saying, I can use it for the Eucharist, or I can use it to take the urine sample to the doctor. It's a cup, right? It's a cup. Well, but what is it supposed to contain? And what is intimacy supposed to express or contain? Okay. In ancient Israel, God was the center of the marriage. The whole thing, by the time of the prophets, it becomes very clear that marriage was there to reflect God's bond and love for his people, Israel, already, way before Jesus pops into the picture. That when you got married, it was like you were there. This couple, the community was saying, this couple, the way they love each other, reflects the way God loves Israel. Not just they have the hots for each other. They reflect the way, that sacrificial giving, offering, sharing of life. Now, for those of us who get married know that what we know about marriage and what really happens when you get into it can be, you know, like trying to cross San Francisco Bay, you know, on a rowboat in the middle of the night in fog.
That's bad.
Because you're told about the fog, you're told about this, you're told about that, but you know the difference between knowing about it intellectually and experiencing it are two different things. But we get into it. And this is where faith is exercised on some level. I don't mean magical faith in the sense of, you know, like the woman who marries the alcoholic and, oh, my love will cure him. Yeah, okay. Anyway, but the fact that, that's what I mean. Like crossing San Francisco Bay at night, who are you in a partnership with across the bay? But the main partner was God. I love what Father Hopko said one time when he gave a talk at a university to these college students about talking about you know, marriage and physical intimacy and all this kind of stuff, and to be that way for a lifetime. And one of the students near the end of the talk raised his hand and said, you know, Father Tom, what you described, that would take some kind of a supernatural help to make it happen. He goes, right. Right. See, you're not in this alone. That's part of the thing. It's not God's watching you as we're running around beating our heads alone. He's actually intimately connected to all this. And I think it's something to understand that in the mindset of ancient Israel, God was present with everything. Not that he was everything, that's pantheism. But God was present, animating everything. That everything that breathes, right? Everything had God's breath. Psalm 104. If you take away their breath, meaning creation, they die and return to the earth. If you send out your spirit, they are renewed. Okay? The idea that the Spirit of God was constantly animating, sustaining all existence. God is there whether we know it or not. I don't care if the guy's a super atheist. God's animating his existence. Not necessarily his thoughts, but his existence. Okay? When they got married, the idea, again, marriage was a means also of expressing service to God, worship to God. Whenever you read in the Old Testament, when they talk about serving the Lord, it had to do with worship. Worship was the primary expression that informed the rest of your interactions with God and others. Give you an example. What defines, and this is why physical intimacy can't be treated lightly, what defines my relationship, or what characteristic is in my relationship with my wife that doesn't exist anywhere else with anyone else? Not going to have people stay with me in my house. We can have meals together. We can do things together, right? Chores, fun, blah, blah, blah. But what distinguishes and informs my relationship with my spouse is the physical intimacy. What informs and distinguishes my relationship with God, they would say, is the worship of God. It's from that everything else is framed. Okay? And as we get into Jesus, we're going to see that even worship was understood as, in a sense, even physically expressing the union and intimacy between God and us. Anyway, in the Hebrew wedding service was this incredible statement of being consecrated, that your spouse was being consecrated to you, and you were being consecrated to your spouse. And the word consecrate means to make holy, literally. But when we think of being made holy, does that make sense? Well, to be made holy because God is holy, yes. But holiness also implies not only some kind of a wholeness, but it also implies that it belonging. Belonging. To be consecrated, set apart for who or for what? You were set apart for someone or something. So the idea of belonging. And a saint is someone who clearly, their lifestyle, their whole being shows it belongs to God. Okay? And technically, according to the New Testament, everyone that follows Christ is a saint. Everyone that's clearly committed to living that lifestyle. Okay? In the church later, the idea of a saint with a capital S were just guys and girls who objectively icon or reflect what that means, but they're not the only ones. The idea that anyone that is genuinely a follower of God, that says God is the center of their life, is a saint. And that's even in the Eastern Christian worship services. Okay. And the clear thing, what God has joined together. It's God bringing it. And that's why if the joining together isn't God, there's a problem. What God joins together. Not what Brad Pitt and Angela Jolie joined together. Not what my hormones just joined together. And just as a sidebar, one of the problems with sexual intimacy before marriage is it does cloud things. But I've seen too many people who they got intimate way beforehand, and suddenly they wake up years later and go, who are you? Because certain issues were being suppressed in the midst of all the passion. Okay? Okay. Any thoughts? Quick questions?
I have one. Marriage in Israel, were those marriages arranged marriages?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They were pretty much arranged. Yeah, they were pretty much arranged. Now, that didn't mean you couldn't be attracted to somebody, as happened with Jacob and Rachel.
Okay, and then you said marriage, a means of serving, worshiping Him. Now, I took that to mean that God, in order for you to have a successful marriage, God has to be in the center of that marriage.
Oh, no question. Because the success is measured by how, and this is important, how we draw Christ out of each other just by being with each other, how us together brings something, uncovers the kingdom, serves the kingdom, that wouldn't happen if we were apart.
Right, okay. So, if Christ is in the center of your marriage, you and your spouse, then you're worshiping Him.
Well, yeah, because you're offering, see, worship is something that's not just limited to a corporate communal gathering of, patterns of rituals and so on and so forth, and everybody's got patterns and rituals, I don't care what they say. But it's supposed to lace your whole life.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Do we want to take a quick break now, or do you want to go on for another 10 minutes and then we take a break?
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes? Okay. Okay, jumping into Christianity. Something really important to understand is, just to let you know, Jesus is not starting a new religion in His mind. Jesus is bringing to fruition what God intended for Israel. Okay? And that's why if we don't know the story of Israel and understand the narrative, we miss at least half of what Christianity is about, if not more. Okay? Israel's point, God made Israel to be a blessing to the whole earth, to be His people with whom that partnership would be restored. Okay? And again, spirituality is physically expressed all the way through the covenant between God and Abraham. God in Abraham's life, Abraham trusting God. God sharing with Abraham, sharing intimately with Abraham. In a way that, like part of the story of Abraham and Isaac being, going to be sacrificed. Why did God tell Abraham to take his son to sacrifice him? Okay, real quick. And the typical Sunday school answer is, of course, for him to grow in his faith. Well, that's part of it in a part way, for real. But also, aside from other things, for him to get a little. Sometimes there is a thing that goes around, comes around. Remember what Abraham did because of Sarah's urging? He threw out Hagar and Ishmael, basically to die. So you think you can just, all right, let's see if we take your kid.
Though that was with God's approval, saying, listen to your wife.
In a way, but it was God, and we'll see this, God sometimes shares things in a way to see how we're going to respond. That's clear, I don't want to get too off the track here. The story of Moses and the Israelites after the golden calf incident. And Moses goes up the mountain, and God says, get out of my way, I'm going to destroy these people. I'm going to start all over with you. And what does Moses do? He argues with God. Now, did God really change his mind? No, he didn't. I want to see what Moses would do. And Moses got a taste of this man. get a taste of this. Because you're going to have days you're going to wish you could just get rid of some of these people. And I think if Moses had said yes, he would have been fired from his position. Okay? But the other thing the early Christians picked up, and keep in mind, for the first 2 centuries, the majority of Christians were Jewish, that in the story of Abraham and Isaac is God sharing with Abraham, and even, it's interesting, Orthodox Jewish scholar at Harvard wrote a book about this, John Levins, God bless him, that Abraham, I want you to get a small taste of what I'm going to go through when I offer up my own child.
Okay.
Anyway. Then there comes Moses with the Torah, and the Torah is saying there's boundaries. There's a relationship God has, but there's boundaries. There's boundaries in the way we relate to God, each other, etc., etc., etc. Then the idea of a king. They wanted a king. God wanted to be the king, and he still had that in mind, but he let them have the kind of king they wanted. But the idea of kingship is something part of Israel. And then the idea of temple. The idea of temple playing in, that there would be a concrete expression of God's presence in and among. And again, marriage is the same thing. It is a concrete incarnation of what God desires. Spiritual realities are physically expressed. They are physically expressed. But all this is heading to a goal. You know, I don't like when people translate in Paul's epistles that Christ is the end of the law. No, he's the goal of the law. He's not the end of it, he's the goal. Okay? And what happens, what Jesus brings about, and is going to bring about, and it's very clear that when he picks 12 disciples, he is saying, we're redefining Israel. Israel is going to be rebirthed, reconstituted here. It's like there were 12 tribes. That's why if you don't know the story, it's like, oh, it's nice he picked 12 people. Okay? Anyway, it's coming to a head in Jesus. Jesus is going to birth and bring about what God always intended. And just real fast, the idea of the figure in Daniel chapter 7, and this is important, whenever Jesus uses the title for himself, the Son of Man. Okay? Son of Man can be used, like in Ezekiel, where it just means I'm a human, the child of an earthling. But Son of Man, the way Jesus uses this, and now non-Christian Jewish scholars are beginning to see this, and it's blowing them away, that this was understood even in parts of Judaism, that there is this figure in Daniel 7 called the Son of Man who is with the Ancient of Days. He stands with God, and God's going to send him into the earth to institute judgment, the kingdom on earth as in heaven, who's going to embody the real Israel, the real people of God, and so forth. He's going to be with God at God's throne, and he will be worshipped with God. So when Jesus says, the Son of Man, this, the Son of Man, that, that's how we have to hear it. Not just, I'm human. Okay? The Son of Man. That you may know that the Son of Man has authority, like when he hears the paralytic that came down through the roof. The Son of Man. But the Son of Man is, and this is part of the invasion, I like to call it, God's coming to invade. He's going to bring about what he always wanted. He's found the one human being, quote unquote, he have an absolute perfect partnership with. Anyway, real quick, and you'll see how this all ties in. I remember as a kid, okay, in John's Gospel, what's the first miracle, quote unquote, we use the word miracle, John uses sign, Mark likes acts of power. Doesn't matter, okay, we'll use miracle for the sake of all of us who went through Sunday school as kids. What was the first major sign miracle that Jesus does in John's Gospel? And it is the famous wedding in Cana. And I remember as a kid, I got to tell you real quick, I kind of laughed. I thought, hey, what's the big deal? This isn't as cool as the other things, man. It's not as cool as walking in the water. It's not cool like raising Lazarus from the dead, you know, making mud and putting new eyeballs into a blind guy. What's up with the water and the wine? Heck, and it's like, you know, it probably didn't feel like any more than when I was a kid and made Kool-Aid, right? At least for the water, it didn't feel like it.
Had to be some good wine, though.
Oh, yeah, it was. But I'm going to read the story real fast. And this is read, by the way, as we know, this was actually a standard reading in the Christian wedding services. And in the East it still is. Okay? On the third day, and again, they're not just being chronological. Whenever they use it, we have to understand the spiritual meanings of all this stuff. 3, for an Israelite symbolizes divinity. On the third day there was a marriage at Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus is there. Jesus also is invited to the marriage with his disciples. When the wine gives out, the mother of Jesus says to him, they have no wine, and Jesus says to her, woman, what does it have to do with you and me? By the way, that's what the Greek really says. But when you have people reacting to Catholics, they're going to translate it in a way that makes it marginalize the Virgin Mary. Anyway, what's this have to do with you and me? My hour has not come. Very potent, by the way. What's this have to do with you and me? Not just me, you and me. Because Mary's in a partnership, as Luke points out very well. When an angel comes to her and says, and she's given the option of saying yes or no. She's the model of what it means to be a Christian. Not just believing in God cerebrally, but having him alive, or even physically. His mother says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now see, if he was being negative to her, why does she say he's going to do it? Whatever, just do whatever he says. She knows he's going to do something. And it's not go down to the liquor store and get more wine. Okay? Now 6 stone jars were standing there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20-30 gallons. 6. God creates the world in how many days? 6. On the 6th day he makes humanity. On the 6th day, man and woman. On the 6th day. And Jesus will be crucified on the 6th day. See, this is not just like, I'm just reminiscing. John's not reminiscing, he's trying to make a point even in the narrative. And water, birth. Again, birth. 6 stone jars of water. For the Jewish rites of what? Purification, cleansing, restoration. Fill the jars with water. And they fill them to the brim, and he says not to take some out and take it to the steward of the feast, the guy who manages the reception. So they take it out, and when the steward of the feast had tasted the water now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward of the feast called the bridegroom and says to him, every man serves the good wine first, but when men have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you've kept the good wine till now. This is the first of his signs Jesus does in Cana of Galilee, manifesting his glory, and his disciples believe in him. When John talks about a sign, he's not saying these are the only miracles, but he's highlighting, and he picks 7 of them. He's saying these tell us what he's here, who he is, and what he's here for. And the first one happens to be marriage. He's here for us to be married to God, and God to be even physically married to us. Plain and simple. That to be a Christian means to be married to God, to live in a marital type of relationship. I'm not saying we have sex with God like the ancient Greek gods and craziness like that. But I am saying that there's that kind of intimacy, bond, and closeness, and so on and so forth. And that therefore marriage is there to be, in a miniature way, some kind of a basic reflection of that reality. Marriage isn't ours to do with what we want. And God establishes this through Jesus. Okay? And part of this reflects the church. John is deliberate writing about the Virgin Mary and the disciples with Jesus at the wedding. That this reality is then fleshed out within the community called the church. That's where this is fleshed out. That's where this is supported. That's where this is actually birthed from. It's not birthed just by my own decision. It is not simply coming about because of me. There's a whole environment and context from which this is birthed out, and it is from within literally the body of Jesus, unquote. Okay? And just to show you the parallel, because they thought in terms of parallelism, so I'm going to finish with one. John 19, there's a parallel between the story and Jesus' crucifixion. As I mentioned, the 6th day, and so on and so forth. When Jesus was crucified, they took his garments, John 19, made 4 parts, one for each soldier. the tunic was without seam, etc. Let us not tear it. So they cast lots for it. To fulfill the scripture, they parted my garments, and for my clothing cast lots. So the soldiers did this, but standing by the cross of Jesus are his mother, his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus sees his mother and the disciple that he loved standing near, he says to his mother, "Woman, look at your son." Woman. Again, paralleling the woman statement. Woman, that phrase is used in Genesis. Then he says to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour on, the disciple takes her to his own home. After Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, says to fulfill the scriptures, "I thirst." A bowl full of vinegar, right? Had wine before, now you got vinegar. There's deliberate parallels going on here. Put on a hyssop held to his mouth, and when Jesus received the vinegar, he says, "It is," I love that word, tetelestai. It is accomplished. It is now complete. And he bows his head, and again, this is what some English translations drive me nuts. It says he gave up his spirit. It says, "Paredoke to pneuma." He gives out the spirit. Now, why is that important? Because when the spirit would be released, and John is very strong that the spirit will be released in a larger sense into the world when Jesus would die, when he's lifted up. And that would be the beginnings of the birth of his own bride. And just so you make sure you understand that, John wants you to hear this. Since it was the day of preparation, in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath was a high day, there are 7 Sabbaths to every feast, especially Passover, so that coinciding of Sabbath with the Passover made really an intense Sabbath, a high Sabbath. The Judeans asked Pilate that their legs not be broken, that their legs be broken and be taken away. We know this story. The soldiers come and break the legs first of the one and then of the other crucified with him. But when they come to Jesus and see that he's already dead, they do not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierces his side with a spear. And at once there comes out blood and water. He who saw it witnesses this, and we know what he witnessed is true, but the force of the word in Greek is reality. This is reality. Why the big deal? John's excited. He's doing cartwheels over this. He's doing cartwheels over this. Why is this a big deal? Why is Jesus' side being pierced a big deal? Blood and water come out. Okay? Now, the typical answer that I've heard, and there's not, like this is wrong or an untruth, was to prove Jesus really died. He was a physical being, because when John's writing, there is a heresy popping up that says Jesus wasn't really a physical being, it's like a hologram. Because, like Greek thought, only spiritual things count. The physical things don't really count in the ultimate sense of eternal immortality and so on and so forth. But there's something else that goes on here. Blood, symbolizing life, the life of Jesus. Water, birthing. And by the time this is written, and the Christians who heard this would have thought of course, of baptism, mingling. So baptism, us, birth, mingling, Jesus, his life, out of his side. But a good Jewish Christian right away would have thought of Genesis. God puts Adam to sleep. He opens up his side, and out comes his bride. That's why he's doing cartwheels. The church is being born. The church is being born. And birth comes through dying. Dying, and what marriage does is the death of egocentrism, all those kinds of